This is another crossover episode between Flourish by Advaita Health and Trip Talks. Ashtanga yoga has long been a big part of my life, and like a lot of people, I've been paying close attention to the drama that's been unfolding in our community. One of the voices that's really stood out to me is Zoë Ward. She's practiced for decades, taught as an authorized teacher, stepped back from teaching, and is now returning with a thoughtful, intentional approach to what it means to share this tradition. This conversation explores the tension between devotion and discernment, and how we can honor a lineage without losing our ability to think and feel for ourselves. It's about learning to use the practice as a tool for awareness and growth, not as a way to punish ourselves or prove our devotion. Hope you enjoy. Today, I am sitting down with Zoë Ward. Zoë is a creative and longtime yoga practitioner and teacher based in Central Virginia. She has studied yoga for more than 20 years, including a decade as a dedicated student of Sharath Joyce, followed by another 5 years as a thoughtful skeptic and nuanced critic of the Ashtanga method through her writing and her Instagram account, The Unruly Ascetic. Welcome to the pod, Zoë.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to really get into kind of what you see as the future of Ashtanga and where you're hoping the conversation goes. But to get caught up to speed, I'd love to hear just kind of a little bit about how you came to the practice.
Uh, yeah, you could say that I came to Ashtanga on a dare. I had been studying other forms of yoga since I graduated from UVA. I had spent a couple of years uh, doing integral yoga through the Integral Yoga, the Yogaville organization, which is right outside my hometown. Although I didn't know that until I went to India for 3 months to study integral yoga, only to realize it was 40 minutes away from my house. Um, and then through friends I had made in Yogaville, I studied with Dharma Mitra in New York, and uh, it had kind of snowballed into a greater interest in vinyasa, and I was a part of a community in Virginia Beach that was really Jiva Mukti motivated, which at that time in the aughts, Jiva Mukti was like the biggest and the coolest and the
Uh-huh.
most stylish kind of yoga. And that led to a curiosity about Ashtanga because David Life had studied Ashtanga, and my friends at the time basically said, "It's really hard, it's probably not for you." And I didn't really know how to take that because 'cause I've always been a hyperfixation type of person, so the idea that something would be too hard for me to take on was very foreign, and I think it was said to me, uh, in with the intention of a friendly challenge, but that is not what resulted. And I did a workshop with Tina McGregor after having kind of casually attempted the series a handful of times. And I really loved what she said during the workshop about how you start at the beginning and you just work your way through. And you get as far as you get, and the idea of not having to figure out what work to do, and having studied different schools of yoga and having been really enmeshed in and a teacher in a vinyasa community that was always like trying to do more and do bigger and be cooler. It was the idea of like, oh, there's just this very straightforward path and you do that and that's enough. That was incredibly, incredibly soothing to somebody who is just an intrinsically motivated person. Like I have
Mm-hmm.
to have something that I'm working on, something that I'm doing. And to simplify the decision making process um, via a progressive series, that was, that was great. That was it. And then I almost immediately left my entire life and community to go to Mysore.
Wow. So started going to Mysore pretty soon after that kind of introduction.
Yeah, it was about a year and a half later. So I practiced in my studio and by myself and with a couple of friends that I could talk into it, for about a year, going back and forth and seeing Kino and subsequently Tim when I could. And then I realized like there was no real way forward other than to prioritize at least one trip to Mysore and see what that looked like.
Yeah, so you went to Mysore and went a few times and came back authorized at some point. Tell me about kind of the trajectory of that and what that was like, both from an experience, just, you know, getting involved in the maybe larger international community, but then also probably like the obsession phase of collecting asanas
Yeah.
and then yeah, so tell me about like I think of that gradual like, you know, probably burning obsession, just getting more and more and fixated on things.
Yeah, it's funny because it's a story I don't relish telling because I not that I'm not willing to. I love to talk about myself, but it's so common for people to talk about their experience in Mysore and to talk about their time with Sharat and to tell the story in a way that presents their experiences really unique and special. And we all have had the, like, identical, unique, and special experiences there, but my experience was unique and special, I promise, it was different from everyone else's. I was really, really fortunate to be at the tail end of a generation of practitioners who were allowed to show up as novices, who were
Mm.
allowed to show up doing everything wrong, and Sharat was patient with that. Like, that was allowed. It was during my, tenure in Mysore that he made the rule that you had to have an authorized teacher, you had to be through primary. So, my first trip to Mysore, I was stopped at Supta Kormasana, and I had no idea that I would be stopped, like, hard, like, called out in lead class, "You stopped at Supta Kormasana." I had no idea. It was mortifying. Um, yeah, so that was a very weird first trip to have gone from being in my home community one of the more advanced yoga practitioners, like a gifted body. I always joke that only in Mysore am I stiff and like a little chubby, because that was not the case at home. And, even doing Ashtanga to the extent that I had made me like really exceptional in my home community. And then I go to Mysore and I remember observing the first class that season and seeing Laruga practice and being like, "Oh my god, what have I gotten myself into?" So, then my second season in Mysore was the last year that Sharat would allow us to, kind of sign up indefinitely. So
Mm-hmm.
I was there all season. I think it was a 6-month season that year, and there were 4 or 5 of us who were there all season, which again was a very kind of special experience, like immersive experience that changed quite quickly afterwards. And that season, I got to Dwipada in intermediate, and then was stopped at Dwipada for 3 years. So if you want to know anything about my body, it's that it is not like for my leg to go behind my head. And so then I was stopped for 3 years there, and I got authorized, level one authorized during that time. And I had been practicing for 4 years, I think, when I got level one authorized, which from the perspective now, of somebody who's been doing the practice for 15 years and chose to take a break from teaching because I wasn't sure of the ethics behind it and whether like I was grounded in myself enough to be doing that. It is wild that like Shaw was like, "Oh great, you can do Supta Parasana, you can stand up from back bends. Like here's a laminated piece of paper." Like that's crazy. Yeah, and I immediately went home and was like, "Oh, I'm authorized," because I was the only authorized person in my city. But there were very long time practitioners here who hadn't prioritized Mysore, and there was definitely an unfair bias towards my authority because I was young and because I was financially irresponsible. And, I was willing to like go for something that these much more mature, much more established adults, um, didn't prioritize.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then eventually I think Shrat gave up on my Dvipada. I don't think anything ever actually changed. I think he just decided that, I suffered enough, and honestly, like I was funny enough. Like he he thought I was funny, so he gave me some leeway around my physical capabilities, and I was level 2 authorized at like Tantra or Karandavasana, and then got like the full series later. But and then I did the teacher's course, the last one he did in 2016. I actually applied, did not get in, and had a friend who was in Mysore go to him and like sob my case to him, and he did let me in the end.
Which just
So
shows how special you really are and were, right?
well, I mean, I'm sure other people had similar, like my friend who pled my case was in the same position. And
Yeah.
she was another person who, in the grand scheme of humans, has a very gifted body, but in the grand scheme of my sort is like pretty middle of the road, like me. But she's lovely and she's dedicated and she just shows up and she does her work and she there are many people like us that Shrat made time for who are not the Kinos and the Larugas and the Magnolia Zunigas of the world. Like we're just kind of normal citizens that he also gave opportunities to. So I appreciate that he did, you know, I don't want to get too sidetracked on what I think of Shrat. I do think he got a little blindsided sometimes by celebrity and definitely assumed that physical giftedness corresponded with ethical maturity, which wasn't always the case as we are currently, addressing as a community. But I do think he saw the people who really really loved it and really really desperately wanted to do right and be there and be a part of it. And I feel very lucky that he saw me in that way and he acknowledged that about me.
Totally. Well, my background or my coming to the practice was I was in the army and I was embarrassed to practice yoga and I had David Swenson's DVD and I would sneak out behind the gym in El Paso, Texas. But then and so I went and practiced with Saraswati once with my father, like right when I got out of the army, and I just spent the rest of the day reading. Didn't have any friends in the world. We made a few,
Yeah.
normal people friends there, but, um, really, really spent that time with a lot of self-study. Went through all sorts of changes, politically, coming from small town North Carolina to um, being in the army to then wanting to, work on criminal justice reform. So I went to law school, but I picked my law school because there was an authorized teacher there. I was only looking for law schools. I'm 27 at the time, and I'm like, I want to practice with an authorized teacher. And I feel very fortunate because, I looked in kind of DC, New York, and I found Tova Steiner. And so I practiced with Tova for maybe a year and a half. That's really the only time I've practiced consistently with a teacher, but I
Mhm.
just bring it up because I think it's interesting. What I was looking for at the time was certainly like I was obsessed with both like the self-improvement project, but also
Mhm.
the what I'll call the enlightenment project. And I was actually looking at some of your old posts today because I think one of the things as we get into current drama and not just drama, but structural things that need to shift in the community. But I'm just struck by we all come to yoga for different things. And I think that's
Mhm.
great. And I think you've highlighted that. But for some of us, like it was part of a very deliberate self realization project, which I think makes
Mhm.
you even more susceptible for harm if you're
Yeah.
coming to it looking for that. And so with that, I guess my first question would be kind of going back to your timeline is you were involved in the teacher training course. I mean, I imagine there's just kind of like a rising Zoe in the Ashtanga world, and then at some point you start to question it, or was there always a questioning having come from, different traditions?
Um, I do think coming from different traditions, particularly coming from the integral yoga background, I don't know if you're familiar with integral
Mm-hmm.
yoga, but Swami Satchidananda's approach to hatha is very accessible and it's very mindful, and their message of yoga is very karma yoga based, is very service based. It
Mm-hmm.
prioritizes being a service to your community over asana. And there's a lot of seated meditation as part of the
Mm-hmm.
practice. So I do think I was lucky to have experience of yoga before Ashtanga, because it's not unusual for people who have exclusively practiced Ashtanga to have this
Mm-hmm.
impression of Ashtanga as a superior method, as these other elements of yoga, with the idea that like they're a distraction from the moving meditation that asana can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sympathetic to that, because when I started doing Ashtanga, I really loved it because the bar was so low for success. Like, you don't have to sit for an hour in the morning. You don't have to do kriyas. You don't have to do pranayam. You don't have to study text. Like, you just do your stretches and like your box is checked. You do yoga. You do the hardest yoga in the world. Congratulations. So so I do think that that was an advantage for me to have already taken a lot of the value of different practices into my heart. Despite the fact that I immediately stopped doing all of them and only exclusively did Ashtanga because that's all I had to do. um, but I'm sorry, I got lost on
No,
that. What
I
was
was
the
just wondering. I mean, when did you become more skeptical of the
Oh,
system, the
yeah. I
community?
I have a really confrontational personality. Like, I'm just a contrarian person. My parents are very contrarian, so it was how I was raised, and I was frequently the person at brunch, at yoga summer camp in Mysore, who was like saying the off-color things and making the jokes, and um of course, like, I was very loyal to the system and saw a great deal of value in it, but that doesn't mean you can't still kind of poke fun at the things that, like, don't make sense, you know? And I did a number of I had a number of, like, bits that I would do in Mysore in, person with people, like my little stand-up routine jokes that would and I don't know if you've seen any of the Meadow character. The
I
Meadow
have.
character
Yep.
is one that I did for a long time, and then I got a really unfortunate amount of encouragement, the during the teacher's course. I had a friend that season who was so supportive and so lovely, still is a has runs a really dedicated program and stays out of trouble. He's an inspiration. But he was very encouraging of like, this is great. This is what the community needs. Everybody needs to lighten up. And then it turned out that I was not allowed to do it publicly. Like, I was allowed to make my little jokes at little cafes tucked away in Mysore where nobody would see them. But when I started making these jokes on the internet and people started noticing, suddenly that was not allowed. I was not allowed. Like that was not cool. I had like crossed a line. And for me, I one of the nicest things a dear friend said to me about my Instagram when I first started like posting more critically, she said one thing she loved about it is that it's me. It's not like
Hmm.
I'm the same person on my page as I am in real life. And I can't really compartmentalize. And that's part of why I wasn't like a great teacher, because I can't separate myself and my experience and my desire to like be really authentically present from a professional persona that is comfortable to digest. So um the my when I had a vlog, back in the day, everybody had a vlog. And that was pretty up and down. It got circulated a fair amount, but there wasn't really room for feedback on it, like not like on Instagram where I get a lot of feedback on how people feel about what I'm doing. So the blog was a little more shouting into the void. And then when I started sharing my jokes publicly, and they were received very, very well publicly, but then privately, I was discouraged. And privately, I was told, like, oh, I'm rubbing people the wrong way. And oh, so and so doesn't really approve of this. And this certified teacher doesn't really think it's appropriate. It was like, what is going on? Because that exact same person thought this was hilarious when I said it to them in real life yesterday. And that brought a lot of awareness to me, that the disconnect between the reality of what Ashtanga practitioners are like when they're just like relaxing and drinking chai and being cool, and they're great and they're so fun and they're lovely and they're kind. But then when they become their public persona who is authorized and who makes decisions for others, they like lose all of their lightheartedness. And I started calling people out on that, and it got real, real ugly real fast.
And what do you think motivated that? I mean, from your side, what's actually going on with the people who thought that you were funny in private, but in public it wasn't allowed?
I think because, oof, that's a great question. I have a couple of answers to it. Well, number one, a lot of the jokes I was making were about how seriously we take ourselves. And it's become more common to talk about it in the last few years. But going to Mysore is yoga summer camp. It's
Hmm.
vacation. It's not a job. It's not full time. Like, it's not hard, Like, you do have to get up very, very early in the morning, and like that can be tough, you know. But you do your practice. You maybe go to like a chanting or philosophy class here and there. Maybe there's like an anatomy workshop offered by some osteopath who happens to be in town. But for the most part, you eat breakfast with your friends, you talk about your practice, you schedule workshops, you take a nap, you write a blog, like it's very relaxed. But there
Right.
was, especially during the time I was there, this conversation about Mysore being this enormous sacrifice, and you have to be dedicated and you have to be serious, and it's so much and it takes so much, and the teachers who go to Mysore every year are such amazing troopers that they get through it, and it's like, so I think there was an issue, this kind of cognitive dissonance around like wanting the world to take us very seriously because we take ourselves very seriously, but also like recognizing on the other hand that like actually it's great though. It's so fun. Like going to Mysore is the funnest thing ever. You get to go and like this guy who's just the coolest, who you totally love, like, gives you advice on the shapes that you work so hard on, and, like, when you've done a really good job, he lets you do another one, and that's so fun, and then you get to go eat all this amazing food and relax in this incredible part of the world, and, like, all of your best friends are there, and you just get to hang out and chat all day, and, like, it's just the two stories don't like, the reality of what it's like doesn't line up with the image we were trying to, like, project out into the world, and I think I was pulling back that veil. And that was not that, that doesn't work for people who, like, their life and livelihood depends on having people take them seriously. And, my whole argument was like, you can be yourself and you can be a goofball and you can love your life and people will still take you seriously. Like, you can be nice and people will still take you seriously. Like, you can let people make decisions for themselves like the adults they are, and they'll still take you seriously. And I don't think the community that I was with at that time, not to speak for the entirety of the community, because I know a lot of people also felt this way, but I think the people I was butting heads with at that time weren't ready for
Hmm.
that transition.
What do you think most people that I've talked to that had personal relationships, especially with Sharat, are, they say like he didn't really teach like that. Or there were, I think when I look at the process, because I feel very much like an outsider, I'm not in the teaching community and had never really had an interest to go that route.
Hmm.
Not that I've, yeah. So I just, but I'm very interested in the dynamics. I find humans fascinating, and I think some of these patterns repeat wherever we are. We like these hierarchies, or we create them eventually. Um, but I've always heard that like the emphasis on asana like is disconnected from the way that even Sharat teaches. But the hierarchical nature, needing to practice with an authorized teacher, that made sense to me. Just like you had to have some culling mechanism for
Hmm.
people to go there and get authorized.
Hmm.
So I didn't take like massive offense, but everyone's always said that he doesn't place the same infinite emphasis on asana, and I think there, but like we've internalized that, especially in the Western world, right? Like we have
Yeah.
just totally gotten fixated, but I think we've also morphed maybe the way the lineage was presented too.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think there's a simple answer to that. Unfortunately, I don't, there's not like a like this is how it was kind of
Right.
answer, because Shara was human, and
Yeah.
he was a complex person, and he would say things in conference that were very definitive, and then he would add nuance to them in personal interaction. And I feel like I'm an example of when he did not prioritize asana. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he prioritized, like, the fact that I prioritize showing up. And so
Mm-hmm.
he created opportunities for me. I assisted him 3 different times, um, because I just kept showing up and I kept getting in his face. And I would make stupid little jokes to him constantly. And he received the jokes. Like, he would either make a face at me that said, like, not now, or he would laugh, and it was never like a joke never just like fell dead. He always
Mm-hmm.
interacted with it, and he was hilarious. He was so funny. And I feel like, if he really were only prioritizing asana, then I would not have been given those opportunities, because my asana was never impressive. My asana was really standard, middle of the road. Like, I could do it, but I had to work hard every day to maintain the ability. I was not like, I was never going to be on a poster. I was never going to be in a video. I could just kind of check the
Mm-hmm.
boxes of success. Um, And he talked a lot about the importance of having a balanced life and relationships and having the practice serve and support your life. He also talked about like, don't you dare go running or don't you dare lift weights or, because that wasn't what he was taught and he had no experience of it. So like, I feel like some of that was really just kind of regurgitating what he was taught, which happens out in the community all the time. That I think people are taking the interactions they had with him that were personal interactions and personal advice. And then they're taking it into their Mysore rooms and they're applying it to every student in the room, every person on the mat, when if that teacher did have a gifted body or if that teacher did have a discipline issue
Mm-hmm.
or that teacher did need some tough love on their mat and Sharat saw that and gave them that tough love, then they take it into their Mysore room and apply it across the board, not realizing that that was actually a very nuanced interaction. And I personally absolutely believe that that is something Sherrod did for everyone who came back season after season. Even sometimes for people who were there for a single season, sometimes he would just see you and he would give you what you needed. But I think because those interactions were so brief and so laser focused that it felt like, oh, this must be generalized advice because there's no way this could be catered to me as an individual. Because how would he even do that? I don't know how he did it, but it was his superpower, and it really was his gift. Um, so I think that is a bigger issue with the way the method is taught, that Sherrod was very nuanced, and we don't give him enough credit for how nuanced he was as a teacher. And that's not something that um, that the teaching community strives to emulate as much as it should.
Yeah, I see like a bell curve, and so many people fall in the middle of like rigidity, and on like
Mhm.
the really, on the tails, you've got the people who are just like, just do your practice, or just, do what feels right, and that is
Mhm.
like the lazy answer and the very wise answer at the same time.
Mhm. Yep.
And you got to
Well,
know.
and Sharat talked about like when you being in Mysore at yoga summer camp is different
Hmm.
than being at home and staying up overnight with sick kids and going to work a 9-hour day and dealing with, your dog who's limping for no reason and your neighbor who's mad about your leaves falling on their lawn and like, all of just the things that come up in life that distract energetically and functionally from your ability to be on your mat. None of that happens in Mysore, and Charlotte knew that, and he interacted with us in Mysore as people who like that was our job at that time,
Hmm.
was to show up and do our work. And I've heard him say it on plenty of occasions, but the people still took the expectation of effort from Mysore home and applied that to actual householders who don't, that's not a reasonable expectation to have for them.
Yeah. So, this, you're starting to see some of those rifts in general, or this personality. And then when did you quit teaching? And if you want to share anything about that, or are you thinking about starting teaching again?
I came home from the summer course in 2016 and had run up against, over the course of that year, at least three different circumstances where I felt like a senior member of the community had misjudged a situation and had, as a result of misjudging a situation, mistreated somebody who was either their student or, you know, lower on the totem pole than them. And in those circumstances, I had said, hey, you probably didn't realize this happened, but it happened. Let's fix it. And the response was that. the person who was harmed is responsible for their own feelings about it, and that's out of their hands, basically. And mm, I then did not probably respond appropriately to that. I was like, "No, you're being a bully. I'm gonna tell Sharat." And unfortunately, when I told Sharat and said, like, "Hey, this person is being a bully. What do I do?" Sharat's response was that they're senior to me and I need to defer to their judgment. And woof, that's hard to hear,
Mhm.
that because Sharat, like, will kind of pay lip service to the, like, everybody's a student kind of talk, but then, like, also was upholding the hierarchy in a way that, was really hurtful. And yeah, and that created a lot of doubts
Mhm.
about, you know, it made me realize that Sharat, was limited in what he could offer the community. He was so gifted and he was so wonderful and we were so lucky to have him. But he's also just a human being, and he was not capable of taking on everything that the community needed. Like, from my perspective, we knew way back, we knew 10 years ago that we needed, like, a board of ethics. And Sharat, I suspect, Sharat was counting on the practice to do the work. Like, he felt like, if people are doing this practice, it's gonna keep them in line, and it's gonna help them make good decisions, and it'll keep everybody safe. But unfortunately, there are so many people doing the practice who are so gifted that their experience of progress in the practice and their experience of being offered authority in the community made them feel ethically superior to other people. It increased the ego influence instead of decreasing it. And then those people were out there causing harm. And me, the just like, kind of annoying, scrabbling raccoon in the corner being like, "Hey, we're all peers. We should offer each other feedback." They didn't want that from me. I don't blame them. I'm annoying. But um, having Sharat say it to me made me realize, like, ooh, we are lacking in really big ways. So I went home and I had a small private studio at the time, and I went home and really had to look at the potential to be a part of that problem. Because even though in my store I was very average and, like, my ego doesn't have a lot of room to shine in that room, at home I'm not average. At home I'm like the cool kid who can do the stuff and is authorized, and, like, like, I'm cool at home and people look up to me. And I I felt like, these people who I looked up to so much made these choices and felt that they were above reproach in their choices, that they could see the harm being done, and they were willing to say the victim of this harm is responsible for their own feelings. I am not responsible for having caused that harm. Like, if those people who are so much more advanced than me can
Mhm.
make that error in judgment, then the potential for me to also make that error in judgment is just way too high. I don't want that responsibility. I don't want to take that risk of causing harm to people in that way.
Mhm.
And it's not quite as like morally superior as it sounds. I also was like chasing a renewal on my space and had other personal stuff. Like, got engaged and knew my life was kind of shifting in a different direction. So it was a combination of, like, really having a lot of doubts about the ethics of the community and my role in that, paired with the kind of convenience of being able to just shift directions and still have a lot
Mhm.
of purpose and have a lot to do in my life if I did that. Um, yeah, and then now, God, 9 years later, I got married very quickly. Congratulations to me. We've been married for 8 years, and we keep joking that now we can get divorced respectively, and nobody's gonna say we got married too fast. So I got married, had a couple of kids. They're getting into they'll both be in elementary school next year, and via my Instagram account, I have made peace with the fact that I can't leave it behind. You
Mm.
know, like I tried. I tried to like put the practice down, and I tried to put down the drive to influence people, and to communicate about the practice in a way that's helpful to people. Um, and I can't not do it.
I
Tried really hard to
I
put it
find that
down.
really
And
interesting because I'm in the same camp as like I have a couple of times where I tried to just I don't need to do this. I can meditate, I can just do yoga, or I can,
mhm,
go for a run, I can go for a hike, but something just kept me drawing me back. Like I do love the
yeah.
sequence and like there's some really great, stuff about doing the same thing every day and seeing what your body can do.
Mhm. Mhm. And it's fun.
Fun.
It's
Yeah.
fun. Like,
Yeah.
it's a fun thing to do, and when you have people to talk to about it, talking about it's really fun too.
Yeah.
And you know, when you figure something out or when you succeed in something for the first time, like, that experience is so wonderful, but then sharing that experience with people who get it, that is so wonderful, and it's just, like, there's so much space for it to be such an absolutely lovely component of a dynamic life, that yeah, I don't I tried to put it down and I couldn't.
So you
It
couldn't put
wasn't
it down, and now thinking about how are you thinking about your position in the community now and teaching, and what do you feel like you're trying to accomplish or explore through your art and writing?
um I'm not a real goals-oriented
Mm.
person. I used to have this conversation a lot when friends would say, like, "What's my goal for 2016?" Like, "It's gonna be this pose," or, "What's my goal for 2020?" "It's gonna be this, movement," or whatever. And I'm not a real goals-oriented person. I'm a little more like, I'm just gonna take the next step and see how
Mhm.
that feels. So I've been thinking about like what my next step could be and what I could offer. And I feel like having tried to walk away from the practice and created space in my life from the practice and the method, which to me are kind of two they're interconnected but separate things. Like the practice is the shapes and the method is the work, and the structure around how it's done. Um and I feel like I'm back into my relationship with with all of it to the point now that I can kind of look back and see what how I got here. Like what were the little things that where were the places where I had to give myself permission to deviate from the method because it was too painful to
Mhm.
engage with the method because I had personally experienced harm around this aspect of the method, or because I had seen students experience harm in this way, and it was too painful to engage with it in that way because I wasn't ready to process those feelings. Um, and I had to do, a lot of work, a lot of trial and error around giving myself permission to do what I needed to do in order for the practice to be a positive, functional part of my daily life instead of a chore, instead of something that I see a lot of people talking about like inspiration doesn't happen every day, and that's where discipline shows up. And I would challenge that to say inspiration rarely happens. Discipline can get you so far, but love, like deep rooted love and value, is better even than discipline because discipline discipline is it's hard for me personally to separate discipline from potential self-harm,
Mhm.
and for me, I remind myself every day that I love the practice and that I love to be on my mat and I love how I feel when I do it. And I carve out space for it because of that love, not because I'm
Mhm.
inspired and not because I'm disciplined, because I did it for a long time because I was disciplined and I was punishing myself.
Mhm.
And, and that's very, very common in the community. So I feel like I'm at a place now where I really want to help people who either are kind of unsure about how the practice fits in their life, um, and especially people who have put the practice down and they're realizing that love, that little nugget of love is still there, and that they want to help it grow, and they want the practice to be in their life in a way that is facilitated by love. And um and I think I can help people do that because it's ridiculous, right? That I was level 2 authorized. I went to Mysore however many times, like, I taught in, like, major programs all over the world, and I still had to coach myself through the permission of agency in my practice, because that's how strongly we have been stripped of agency in the way the method is taught, and I would really like to help people overcome that boundary, because it can be, it can be a very love-based practice instead of a authority, discipline, structure-based thing.
Yeah, where do you see the your teaching method deviating if you had to kind of make these camps? Like what how do you kind of see the playing field? Or I'm interested in getting at like what you want to present as a teacher, but also
Mhm,
just, how we can navigate student teacher relationships in a way that,
mhm,
like you may be the right teacher for a lot of people and you may self-select out of being a teacher for other people, and that should
mhm,
be okay in my mind. But I think
for sure.
there's a lot of protection over things that I've seen in the Ashtanga world too. Like, those are my students, or uh,
Mhm.
so. Yeah, I'm curious. Like, how do you just see the kind of playing field first? Like, what you have to be in opposition to something, or you're saying this is I want to do it differently.
Yeah, I I don't want to start from scratch because I'm not ready to go back to teaching people who don't know the method at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that about myself, that um I'm not confident in the starting from scratch. But I do feel like for people who have kind of a baseline of the asana and the movement, and what that traditionally looks like, um, I I know the questions I had to ask myself to understand where I was being driven by a sense of a need to subscribe to a system and a community that I wanted to be a part of. Like, for it to count as Ashtanga, it has to look exactly like this. And the motivation to be a part of the community is a big driver for a lot of people. It very much was for me. Um, so I know kind of how to put that down now, and how to um, take ownership of the label, and to be able to say I'm allowed to use this system in a way that serves me, because I am a unique individual, and but to also play that against what I call the snowflake butterfly effect, which is the kind of vinyasa dialogue that you're complete and perfect exactly as you are, because we're not, we're not, we're a mess. And So playing against the whole juxtaposing that, what I love about the Ashtanga of no, which is the tradition, right? That like you stop here, this is the end for you, this is incorrect, do it again kind of drive that does get you to show up and does get you to work hard and gets you to acknowledge like, hey, you know what, I'm not perfect. Like I have room for growth. I have to
Mm-hmm.
face my own, like I have to be willing to accept suffering as part of the process. Like that's awesome. Love that about the system. But the flip side of the coin is like, what work do you want to do right now? What work feels safe and
Mm-hmm.
useful to you? What work maybe, maybe now is not the time for this work. What work feels too hard, is too scary, is too deep, like working on expanding the window of tolerance in terms of our availability for suffering in an intelligent and nuanced way rather than the traditional Ashtanga approach that says this is the suffering. The suffering comes in this order and you face it in this order and you work as hard as you have to work to face it. And like, ooh, that's not real accessible. So I don't know if this is answering your question, but I am putting together a program where I have a limited number of people that I will kind of take them step by step through this process of observing what works in their life for making them feel safe, and what makes them accessible to controlled suffering, and how can we tie that in with the practice, and how can we reintegrate the practice into life in a way that feels controlled, that feels accessible, that feels useful, and kind of test those boundaries together, so that they have a resource, somebody who is giving them permission, because I don't feel like I need to give people permission, but I know a lot of people coming out of the traditional system are looking for approval, are looking for someone to say, you're allowed to do this. And as much as I don't want people to feel like they need to get permission from me, that's not at all what I mean. I do know that I do actually have the qualifications to give that permission. And if you give people permission to trust themselves enough, then they will start to trust themselves. And that's kind of what I'm working on right now, is systematizing that process. So it's
Mm-hmm.
something that I can offer, in a controlled, deliberate format.
I like that. The I did my homework in preparing for this conversation by listening to two podcasts you were on, and I think the one with Adam Keen, you there was a discussion about kind of the role of the teacher or something around asana, and I believe he said something along the lines of, "I just kind of see myself like an asana coach," and you were
Hmm.
saying you have a different approach to that that maybe got you in trouble with senior teachers or
Yeah,
certified
yeah,
teachers or
for
whatever.
sure.
And
Yeah,
to me
I'm the
this is
opposite.
yeah,
I'm the
this is
opposite.
and this is I think what really draws me to a lot of your work, but also again there's this fine line, whoever's in charge is just a human, but they're in a
Hmm.
position of authority and we need to grapple with those dynamics, and we also need to just be clear about like the way that we're planning to teach, because
Hmm.
it's not that there's a wrong answer necessarily, but you need to know what you're signing up for. At least that's kind of how I feel. But I'd like for you to tell me kind of how you conceptualize the role of the teacher and the asana in the relationship.
Yeah. It's really hard for me to speak to the community at large because I believe that different approaches serve different students. And the internet and teaching remotely is a great resource because it allows students to move towards the teacher and the community that best serves them, where, we used to be very limited by proximity. Um, and hopefully that will help teachers and the community at large be a little less attached to students as possessions, because we see that a lot, that people are very, that's my student, that's my that their progress is my progress, and taking ownership of what the student has accomplished. Um, I taught primarily when I was teaching before I had my own program in Charlottesville. I taught in other people's programs. I was the Mysore sub. Like I would go to a city when that teacher would go to Mysore and I would sub
Mm-hmm.
their program for them. And as a result, because I don't want to alienate my employer, basically, the students would say, I'd be like, "Hey, tell me about what you're doing. What is this? What are you doing?" And they'd be like, "Oh, I'm doing this, and my teacher said to do it like this and to try like this." And inevitably, over the course of 2 or 3 months, I would say, "Okay, can I offer you a different approach? Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
try focusing on this pose, or let's try approaching this pose in this way, and give that a try for a week. And then next week, let's talk about, like, did that work for you? Do you prefer what your home teacher gave you to do? Let's figure out which approach we want to work with." And frequently, students are so gracious and, generally speaking, so lovely in like every community I was ever in. And they usually liked to do what I was offering because it was a limited time. They knew their
Yeah.
teacher would come back and they would just go back to what they were doing before. So they usually liked to kind of jump on board with something new for a little while. Um, but the takeaway was that I couldn't show up and say, "You have to listen to me. You have to do what I'm telling you to do. I'm the teacher. There is no room for deviation," because like that, I would get fired. Like
Mm-hmm.
the teacher would come home and be like, "Wow, so you're a jerk," So, as a result of that, when I was teaching in my own community, or I was teaching kind of jointly in a couple of different programs in Charlottesville, um, there I was the one who would say, "Oh, well, what did this other person tell you to do? Okay, that sounds great. That makes sense. I can see why that's valuable. I would have you approach it like this for this, this, and this reason. So give it a try and give me feedback." And then a couple of days later, "How did that feel? How's this feeling? What do you think?" And I was flabbergasted that the response I got in those circumstances where the other teacher was observing me teaching, they got mad and they were like, "You're talking too much. You don't maintain the solemnity of the Mysore room. It's too much dialogue." I had uh, a, s- I- a participant in Mysore class. I would not call her a student. She was never my student. She's authorized in her own right, where I tried to discuss like a posture that she was really struggling with, and she wanted me to just adjust her through it. And I was like, "I'm not really comfortable just manhandling you into this pose. Like, what's happening in your head when you do it? Like, what's going on?" Because I could see this big emotional
Mm-hmm.
response. And she said she hadn't paid for my pseudo psychobabble. She just wanted the adjustment. And yeah, and I think it's just a temperament thing. Like some people teach that way, and some people like really are interested in the emotional dynamic and in giving students tools and letting students make choices for themselves. And then I think some teachers, and I don't necessarily think it comes from a bad place, want to keep the Mysore room very meditative, like very quiet, very bare bones communication because they have a lot of faith in the practice itself doing the work. And that just wasn't the case for me. Like showing up and doing the poses I didn't make a lot of progress doing that. I
Mm-hmm.
needed to start asking myself those questions and dialoguing with people who are senior to me about those questions. And then I started making so much progress, like on my mat and in my personal life. And that was amazing and inspiring and so motivating for me. And I just really, really, really want to share that with people. And I had a little Mysore program with like 5 students, and they liked it. And so, there are your people who will like to approach it that way. I have a friend who has a program in a city with a competing program that's very, very traditional, and my friend's program is similar to the way I teach, very consent based, very what, does it feel useful to you? We'll decide collectively if we think it's appropriate to like take on new poses kind of stuff. And like they come up against the pushback of it's not traditional, we don't like it. Um, for any number of reasons. But, that's I have recognized that that's not something about myself I can turn off. So I'm hoping as I move forward um to be able to offer that in such a way that it's clear that that's what students want from me,
Hmm.
rather than trying to convince people that it's valuable. Um, and I just hope that the rest of the community creates space for that. And if the Mysore room isn't the space for that, that's fine. You can have after hours or before practice times, or you can communicate with students, via messaging or emails. But I think we need, as a community of teachers, to coach our students through discussing their experience of the practice and coach them through advocating for themselves. And I feel like I'm uniquely suited to give people permission to trust themselves. Like as a community, all teachers need to be a little more motivated to remind their students that they have agency and they have a voice and their voice is valid and has a right to be considered in the decision making process.
Yeah, I find it interesting again, feeling kind of on the outside looking in, but there's so much that's self-referential in the community, right? Whether we
Hmm.
use the tradition, which, depending on who you talk to, you hear very different things about what that means. And right,
Yeah.
like what about when it was the original Shala and,
Mm.
like how much, personal interaction actually was there, right? Like,
Hmm.
like I've always
Well, and we
found
never
that
talk about the language barrier.
or the language or the culture that we come out these practices come out of. And so,
Yeah.
like one of the things because I came to it specifically, like I came to the practice because like my life was a mess and I wanted to do something different, right?
Uh-huh.
And the simple rigidity of doing the same thing in the morning every day was unbelievable for me. I
Yeah.
also was fortunate, I feel fortunate that I got this seed planted that the purpose of practice was not asana, and
Uh-huh.
I also kicked off my, interest in meditation. And then when I did find an authorized teacher that I could practice with for a long time, she really told me like, "Hey, like I don't think you're going to get everything you're looking for from asana and I'm not going to be the only teacher in your path, but you
Yeah.
know,
Tova is wise beyond her years. Like
she,
you really are so what kind of karma dropped you in Tova's lap? Because she's incredible. And she has a level of maturity and a level of non-attachment around the practice and around teaching that is, I mean, is so unusual in the practice. And I was very fortunate to be introduced to her um maybe on my first trip to Mysore. And I was really lucky to have the example of her and Jill Manning and a couple of really awesome women who were doing the work, very quietly and very maturely and not with any sense of celebrity or a drive for authority. And that was kind of like my first, that's what I thought it looked like. That's what I thought
mhm.
being authorized and being a teacher looked like. So it took me a while. Like I didn't see it for what it was for a long time, because when it looks so healthy, when you first
Right,
see it,
right.
it's hard to recognize like, oh, there's actually this it's much, much, much bigger than I thought it was. And it has a lot more problems than I saw because I happened to first get a glimpse in the window in a place that is very, very healthy and very safe.
Yeah, and before that, I had a teacher who was not authorized, but very militant, as if that made it more traditional and better,
Mhm.
right? Like it
Yeah.
was a
There's a lot of that.
chip on my shoulder, chip on his shoulder that, we need to be super hardcore. Well, one of the things that Tova and I have been discussing more recently is obviously you know, why everything reached a fever pitch in the Ashtanga community. And
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, or
About
um,
Taylor specifically?
Taylor specifically, or I think that brought to light. I think what's finally happening, the way I experienced it was we had the Me Too in America, which kicked off a lot of the Patabi Joyce
Mhm.
revelations,
Yeah,
I guess, and then
yeah.
I have. I was, on the Trini Foundation board, so I had a personal relationship with Taylor. Um, and I think that we're also pointing to systemic issues that are just now kind of really being talked about with a little more depth, and maybe that's because there's kind of a vacancy with the lineage holder and trying to figure
Mhm.
out how the pieces fall. So
Mhm.
I think I'm excited that your voice is prolific right now online, if I should use that word for the small community that is Ashtanga. But yeah, like I'm very interested in the discussions that are happening about kind of, what comes next, but also what led us here, and just what do we need to do?
Yeah, yeah. I did not renew my authorization, which the transition to the Shrat Yoga Center, and the Shrat Yoga Center website from the KPJ AYI, all of that happened kind of around the same time with the Patabi Joyce allegations, I guess is an appropriate word, although it feels diminutive to the experience of the people who were harmed. I, well, I didn't feel it was appropriate to be required to renew my authorization because, like, if a college changes some aspect of its name or builds a new campus, you don't like have to take your diploma to them, and that felt petty. And I'm kind of a petty person, so that was very frustrating. But I was also very disenchanted with Shrub's leadership at that time because he I was told by people who are traveling to Mysore that he spoke directly to it in conference, but I also went to, I figured it out at one point, over 100 conferences, um, if not hundreds of conferences, where Sharat spoke directly to a number of issues that should have been said to the community at large, not to the 120 people who were in Mysore at that moment in time. And he was he was very direct about the fact that we should not film and like propagate what was said in conference. Um, so if he did make a direct statement to it, it didn't get to the public because he actively chose to hinder the ability of the community to dispense his direct comments. So the fact that they, didn't get out to the community at large was a reiteration to me of this issue, this insular issue of like we're just going to keep ourselves to ourselves and we're going to be private about the things that are uncomfortable and like Sherrod might say things to an elite group that makes the elite group feel better, but then the group is just going to turn around to the community and say, we feel fine, so everyone just needs to stop now. And like, gross. And I didn't really realize when I was part of the group, when I was hearing the things from Sherrod and I was comforted by his words, I didn't realize, how elitist it was that I thought like I hear it and I feel good about it and I'll tell my community and that should be enough for them. Like
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not the Pope, like to be like hearing it from me is enough for you. Um so that was incredibly problematic to me. And there's no comment, there's no redoing that. There's nothing we can do to get around the fact that
Mm-hmm.
that was handled really poorly at that point in time. So I think there were a lot of people like me who were left feeling unsettled by that, but just kind of kept going, and and kept doing the work and saw value in the practice and didn't want to throw the whole thing away because of one circumstance of poorly managed PR around somebody who's dead, like, I guess I'm not going to throw away, like, 10 years of practice for this. Although people did, there
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
certified teachers who handed back their certification because they, did not like how it was handled, and respect to that. Um, but I do think not addressing it then is why there is this furor over Taylor now, because it is a very clear, it's a point in history that we can put our finger on and say, we did it wrong. And this happened. These people were hurt. This person maintained his position because because Sharat thought that the practice would weed out the bad ones. And if he, I don't, that's kind of all it boils down to, is that Sharat didn't do that work or put that work into place because I think he genuinely believed that doing the practice is enough to keep people from doing harm. Or the kind of inverse of that, that anyone who would do harm would not stay dedicated to the practice. But the way the hierarchy is set up and the way people with gifted bodies are congratulated, and any kind of narcissistic tendency, like anybody who has that type of tendency and then has a gifted body, and those two are tied together and they're offered authority and they are constantly congratulated, like their motivation to keep showing up and keep doing the work is not spiritual growth, it's power.
Yeah.
And they're getting the power. So unfortunately the practice, where Sharat felt like the practice would attract seekers, and the people who would be genuinely dedicated, long time worldwide influences would be limited to people who are genuine seekers. Like, unfortunately, um, that's not what happened. And I think that that's probably, and I it's hard to say that Sharat like did us dirty, because he meant very much to me personally and to so many people. But for the third time, I think I have said he's human,
Yeah.
and and he had a naivete to what we as students are like, and he didn't protect us from the wolves in sheep's clothing, because he it didn't occur to him that the wolves would wear costumes,
Yeah.
um, so that's how I think it got here.
Yeah. One angle I've never heard people talk about this publicly much, that I find very interesting, just thinking about it as, entrepreneur, I guess, by trade, um, is the money side of things. And I think,
Mhm.
like, and you mentioned the naivete, and I think sometimes, like, even for, I'm sure that most teachers have done the math on how much money was made in, a season, and then how
Mhm.
much harder it is, right? Like, just our incentives with social media, like there can
Mhm.
only be one guy in charge doing that. And then how does
Yeah.
everyone else carve out their livelihood, which, just kind of feeds into the need for authorization, then level 2, then I want to be certified. Like, how do you really make this a sustainable, financial path too? And I think that's been one of the things, like, I'm thinking a lot about in the future, and what types of teachers and programs are going to be out there. And
Mhm.
I want it to be a financially sustainable path for teachers so that they can actually focus on the ethics and can actually focus on, more than just, making shapes.
Yeah.
um but I don't know, if that is an interesting topic to you, but
Well, I mean, we are in the throes of late stage capitalism, so I'm not really sure that that's a realistic ask for the world.
Mm.
Like, and not to say that it couldn't have been, but I there are other economies in the world
Yeah.
than America. So, there are other places that where people could be more successful, but the cost of living is so high. I feel like to really be truly financially stable as an Ashtanga teacher, or as a yoga teacher in general, you either have to diversify wildly. You
Right.
know, being an influencer is is I think how a lot of people bridge the gap.
Mhm.
Ashtangis, I see more often than there does kind of seem to be this like taboo, like an Ashtangi would never be an influencer, kind of. You don't see that, Ashtangis like making money off of influencing. I'm seeing a lot more one-on-one coaching, like
Mhm.
remote coaching, that I don't think Sharat would have approved of. And it has like proliferated in the last year since we, you know, unfortunately don't have Sharat's feedback anymore. Um, there's also the workshop circuit, but
Mhm.
workshops are so expensive now. It's crazy. I mean, $1,000 for a weekend, so expensive. That it's that kind of the cost benefit analysis of like, can you justify that expense? I'm seeing a lot of retreats. Do you feel
Mhm.
like you're seeing this
Mhm.
as
Oh
well?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of like you invest the whole week and like
Mhm.
turn it into a vacation, like rather than a weekend workshop where you're not taking time off of work or anything. It's fitting into your regular life. It's like this is what you do for your
Mhm.
vacation now. Um, I know there are a couple of more senior teachers who are offering My Source seasons at their
Mhm.
studio to like encourage people to come practice with them for like a month or whatever. But I personally think that the value of authorization at this moment in time, from what I am seeing, is more of a liability
Mm.
than than a selling point right now, especially after the letter and the authorized. Oh, you can't even say authorized community because the greater authorized community was not consulted in the letter. It was a limited, a
Mhm.
closed group of people who made a decision on behalf of the larger community, which is what I have consistently criticized as a pattern that the leadership have. Um, I I am getting a lot of feedback in my space that there is a sense of distrust around people who are authorized
Mm.
because it it correlates with a level of privilege that is unrelatable to a lot
Mhm.
of people who, are either young to the practice or limited in their privilege around it. They're like, I don't want a teacher who like, has this crazy gifted body or has like tons of money and free time to go to my store. That's not me. That's not my life. They won't understand me. Like, I don't want to practice with someone like that. As well as the willingness to subscribe to the hierarchy is not a great look right now,
Mhm.
because where just like a couple of months ago, the hierarchy was the hierarchy and everyone took it for granted. And of course, there were lots of people who said it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm one of them, but there is much more space and an amplification of voices who are saying like this hierarchy is the reason that people experienced the level of harm that they did because there were a lot of women who were doing all of the work behind you know behind behind an
Mhm.
authorized teacher, and they were not getting the credit for the work. They weren't getting the like emotional, energetic credit, the credit from the students. They were passing the credit right on to him. And, it's still something that some of these women struggle with. And it's something I struggled with, when I assisted Tina McGregor and Tim Feldman for years in international retreats and programs and stuff, and they were, I mean, lovely teaching mentors to me for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And their way of teaching was very, very different from one another. And
Mm-hmm.
it was very useful to see the kind of two different approaches to the Mysore room and to see that they can get along, even though they interact really differently with students. Um, but for the longest time, when I would teach, it was always, well, Tina says, well, Tim says, well, Sharat says, and never, this is what I know in my body, this is my experience. And I was authorized and I was
Yeah.
doing that, you know? So I really hope that there's more people are when they're looking for a teacher, they're not saying like, oh, you're authorized. They're saying like, how long have you been practicing? Like, what's your relationship to the practice like? Because I was authorized when I had been practicing for 4 years. I had no business teaching anything to anybody, you know?
Well, if you want your
So
kids to be like, at the head of the lineage, they just got to be in gymnastics now. They got to be cheerleaders, right? Like
yeah.
they can't be, they should be authorized by like 16 or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I have a friend whose mother is certified, and she was authorized, but gave her authorization back. And it is very interesting how I joke that she's Ashtanga royalty. She's like a little Ashtanga princess and practices with an authorized teacher, and and she will discuss with me, and she'll say, hey, I've got this thing going on in my practice and it's impacting my body in this way. It's impacting my life in this way. And I'm like, stop doing it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. You've been doing this practice since for what, 26 years? Like just stop doing it. If it 26 years later still doesn't work, yeah, you can probably put it down.
Yeah.
And I was like, just she was like, oh well, I don't want to. I don't. They're kind of strict, and they play by the rules. It's like, well, maybe talk to them because you are like a princess in the lineage. Like if anybody can can be the one to say, hey, I want to have a dialogue about the decisions for what my practice looks like instead of just doing what you tell me to do. Like, girl, it's you.
That's so
So
funny
I
because
hope there's
again,
more of that.
yeah, my only time with a teacher was always very much like that. How is this
Mhm.
practice going to fit in? So it's hard for me to imagine not, having that kind of relationship. What,
Yeah.
I guess as we're kind of wrapping up, like, what's most interesting to you right now as you're thinking about what you're going to put out in the world and how you want to, I guess on the personal side, like what's most interesting to you right now? And then the second question being what's most important in the discussion around the community, or are you separating that and saying I'm going to do what I'm, going to do, and then I'm going to
Yeah.
comment on the community because it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Um, I am trying to stay away from any sort of desire to influence the community at
Mm.
large.
Yeah.
Because I know that it's not good for me. Like I have at a number of points tried very hard to have an impact on the community at large. And, I can look back on those times and know that my desire for influence was coming from a good place. But it ended up being an incredibly painful thing to try to do. So I am trying to stay really present with that right now because I'm getting questions about like what I'm involved with and things that other more a- acknowledged members of the community are doing and asking if I'm involved and asking if they're taking my feedback on things. And um, I I recognize like the when I am asked to contribute, the part of me that is like, I have things to say. And also when I find out that a conversation is happening that I have not been invited to, how that feels. Um, and I don't like either of those
Mm-hmm.
feelings. So I am trying very much to focus on, what can I offer the community? Because I have spent a few years uh, offering the community some feedback on the way it functions, but I haven't been an agent of change, and I haven't offered any like real resources other than kind of thinking and talking points. So I'm working on my own kind of education, and what some of the stuff we connected on, like, trying to deep dive into trauma and what that looks like in the body, and looks like in how that manifests in people, mostly not because I think I'm not equipped to help people with their trauma, but I do want to be able to recognize when students are having a traumatic response to something that's being asked of them, because I think that's a gaping hole in the the kind of repertoire of teachers. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think every Ashtanga teacher in the world needs to be trauma informed, but they need to be able to recognize it when it comes into their room, so that they are not promising something that they can't deliver on. So I'm doing that work right now for myself, and hopefully then to offer an ongoing start with structured program for coaching people into independence and agency in their relationship to their practice. And then I would love if that turns into like an ongoing community that I can offer support to. I'm i am extremely privileged that I don't need to worry about the economics of it. Like, I need to like make enough money that it makes sense for the time it takes away from my family and the things that I
Mm-hmm.
will then have to hire out as a response, as a result of the fact that I'm working. But I don't need to pay the bills with it. So um that that leaves me a lot of freedom to do stuff that I'm interested in, and to not have to cater to whether it will be popular. I can, just target the people that I think I can help, and hopefully actually do that.
And I guess maybe final question is just how would you suggest relating to asana practice? Knowing that it may go in some phases, but if through your 20 years of practice, you know,
Mm.
what kind of, relationship, that balance between, there is an element of discipline, but, learning to be intuitive. And how do you go from, the strict rigidity maybe that serves you at some point to becoming more
Mhm.
intuitive? Or I'm, as someone who's just now after 11 or 12 years of practice starting to like listen to my body, uh,
Uh-huh.
it it's definitely like the one thing that I see there's still a gap between the real, the discipline side and the listen to your body. Like, how do you know what to do? But anyway, yeah,
Trial and error.
yeah,
Trial and error, just like anything. I'm fighting myself down from making some horrible joke about how you can sign up for my course and then you'll find out. Um, but this is what I'm trying to systematize
totally.
my advice on this topic right now. So I love that question. Um, I think there are components. Number one, of observation. You have to be actively observing at all times. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a component of disassociation with their practice that feels like meditation, and
Mm,
that they are not actually experiencing what they're doing, and they leave their practice with this kind of numbness that in a very overstimulated world feels kind of soothing.
mm-hmm,
And I think that you can only disassociate if you're like following an external plan. So I think the structure and the rigidity of the practice and the sequence of asanas in some ways can be a hindrance because we need to stay very present with what we're doing. And like I've done it, I've definitely gotten on my mat and like been doing sun A, and then suddenly I'm in Prasarita Padottanasana and I'm like, I don't even remember getting here, because I had just zoned out. And um, you know, so it's being present in the moment, but also present through the rest of your day. And how do you feel? What's your energy like? Was it a good expenditure of energy? Do you feel, or did you feel like you could have worked harder and you're motivated the next day to like put a little more oomph into it? Or are you exhausted and realizing that what you did today was not sustainable? So that like that constant presence and observation is really important. It can't be like you do it when you're on your mat. It can't be like the advice is so frequently like it has to be habit, And I completely disagree with that. I think it needs to be something you actively choose to do every day. And because when you have the option to not do it, but you choose to do it, it just has a different energetic impact on you, and you're more present with it if you have the option to give it a pass. And you know how if you have an option to not do it, you have to just not do it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You have to say, like, I don't feel like it today. I'm super tired. Like, I didn't sleep well. My kid's got this thing going on, whatever. And you're like, I'm going to take that time. I'm going to take that 40 minutes, that 90 minutes, that 2 hours that I would normally put into my practice. I'm going to give that time back to myself today. And I'm going to use it for a different sort of replenishing practice that serves me. Whether it's just quietly drinking a cup of tea, maybe reading a book that is really kind of filling your cup these days, walking your dog, enjoying, like right now the weather's amazing in the morning, right? Like sometimes I don't want to shut myself into a dark room. I just want to sit on my porch. And I think when you allow yourself deviation, then you value adherence more. And then when you get on your mat next, then you can really observe. Either like, oh, I'm on my mat and I feel so good and it feels so good to be doing this. I'm so happy to be in this space. And the rest of the day, you're like, I felt great on my mat this morning. I have like my energy is back up. I'm really present. This is wonderful. Or maybe you take a day off, you take a week off, you take 3 years off, and you step back on your mat and you're like, oh no, this isn't what it used to be. Like it's hard. Like it feels different and I don't like how it feels different, and it's very emotionally painful for it to be so different than it was when I
Mm-hmm.
was disciplined. And that is like you have the opportunity, if you're really present, you're really observing, you have the opportunity in that moment to see like, ooh, that's some ego like attachment right there. Like maybe my practice when it looked like that before, maybe it wasn't good. I just liked being good at things. Like maybe it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't actually good for me moment to moment. I just liked being capable. And what I liked about my practice was proving that I'm capable. So then
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, then find something about your practice you like. And maybe right now your practice is not going to show you that you're capable, but maybe your practice right now can show you that you are peaceful, and your practice can show you that you can be kind to yourself, and your practice can show you that you are a hard worker who can accomplish just about anything if you're steady with your work. And maybe your practice will show you that the thing you were trying to accomplish, it doesn't actually serve you and it's not useful. Like all of the but it's like it's constant. It's constant.
Yeah.
You can never like that has to be interesting. And for me, for it to be interesting, it's not about being disciplined in it. It's about it being rooted in in kindness
Mm-hmm.
and in the desire to support all of the different parts of me that need guidance. Because like there's self, who should run the show but rarely gets to, and like all of the other parts are running the show. And the practice can be such a gorgeous place to check in with that and to kind of sift through them. But in order to do that, if like one of your parts is like this very like, protective, like I need to be capable, I need to be powerful, I need to be able to like be disciplined. Like if that part is running the show, like is running your practice, then like you're not doing it, and it doesn't serve you in the same way.
I lied. I have at least one more question, but they'll be quicker.
Okay.
Do you still identify? Do you identify as a seeker? You used the term earlier, and it
Yeah.
is one of like it's a question I actually ask a lot, and it's at
Yeah.
the kind of at the core of my practice right now in some ways. But I'm always curious how people relate to that term. Or
Yeah. Um, I don't. No.
did you?
Short answer is I don't. Yes, I did. Um, at because for me, and this is, very personal. Um, it's a personal path. I in 2016, I stopped teaching and I stopped going to my sort and I decided to close my shala and get married. And I made a conscious choice to stop being a seeker and to be a householder.
Mm-hmm.
And because being a seeker, I it wasn't working. I wasn't like I didn't know enough about myself. And it is very interesting. I've never thought about it like this before, but it's very interesting to realize how, and this is kind of tying back to integral yoga and like the karma
Mm-hmm.
yoga. Um, when you're a householder, when you're because I'm I'm a homemaker. Like
Yeah.
I haven't had a job. Well, really, I'm not strong yoga. I've never had a job. But I haven't been employed beyond like teaching yoga classes here and there. Since I got married, I was an event planner for an event coordinator. When I got married, but literally I got married, got pregnant with my son, which was our goal, and stopped working. And the selfless service that is required from a stay at home mom and a house manager is unbelievable. It's it's the worst job I've ever had. It is and I'm so lucky to get to do it. Um, but I've learned so much more from being of service to my family. And like this applies to my extended family. I'm very close with my father who is blind. And needs a great deal of support to continue his life independently on our family farm. And what I have learned from being of service to my family so wildly overshadows what I learned from putting my life behind my head. I mean, like my work on my mat absolutely prepared me for the relentlessness of being a parent, because it is shockingly relentless, especially babies. Um, but yeah, I would not say that I'm a seeker. I I have sought.
Do you
And
maybe even more controversial question then? Would you say you're a finder in some way? This is a paradigm most people are not comfortable saying, but
sure. No. Yeah, for sure. I do. And I've said that about my time in Sherrod. Like I was very comfortable. I was comfortable walking away because I got everything I ever wanted. Like I was level 2 authorized. I, was into third with him. I had, been to Mysore and made friends and had worked with Tita McGregor and like, I had done all of these things that were like checking boxes for like, did I pay my dues? Is anybody going to question my validity at this point? Like No, like I don't think my body could have finished third. Like it's not going to finish third like that. And that wasn't an expectation I ever had. So I had like achieved these goals. And so it was comfortable to kind of shift my attention to new goals, you know, um, to relationship goals and family goals and all of that. And so in a lot of ways, like I got as much as I had hoped to get out of it. And like, relationships are hard and parenting is hard. And I feel like my time in the practice gave me so many tools for that that I wouldn't have had. And like, does that mean that I think I am like morally superior or spiritually superior? Absolutely not. It means the bar I had for success when I was 22 and graduated from UVA and like went to India for the first time, I like my bar for success was like completely unrealistic. I'm gonna be enlightened or something, kind of goal. And now, 20 years later, my goal is like a contented life where I have good relationships and I like am serviceful to my family. And so for me, the next step now is how can I be serviceful to the community again? Because I haven't done that in a long time and I haven't offered anything in terms of the practice. Um, and and yeah, so I don't know. Maybe ask me in a couple years,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll be a
I,
seeker again. Because like, isn't
I'll
that
t- well,
that's like
I'll
the
tell. I mean, I
Indian?
don't. My conceptualization is that spiritual communities in general keep people there. There's this orientation that we need to be seekers forever, but that's really
Mhm.
kind of part of the hierarchy too. And
Yeah,
the enlightenment conversation can happen another day, but like I do believe like a lot of people kind of find it or find what they're looking for, and then they can go on to do life, and they have tools. But one of the things I've explored recently is that, you know, we don't have to keep picking up the narrative that we need to be seekers. Like we can do certain things, and we can even have a teacher without having that seeking energy. And
yeah,
I actually, I mean, not that you asked for it, but my opinion is like the way you're talking about sharing the practice is like you found something, and now that you can
mhm,
actually share it because you're
yeah,
not just parroting other people's stuff. Like you now
yeah,
know what you've got. So
yeah. And like,
I'm
and
personally,
I know that it's limited. I know
yeah,
what I have to offer
totally,
is like
totally,
it's in a very single little vein, but it is like a little vein that like the community is large enough that there are enough people for it to be useful. But at the end of the day, this is a householder's practice.
totally.
And Sharat said that to us all the time. It's a householder's practice. And it I I hadn't previously had the option to be a householder. And
Hmm.
now that I have had that experience, I am so overwhelmed, like in a very positive way, overwhelmed by the householder experience with the practice.
Yeah,
And the fact that we would say to people who have had marriages and careers and supported their own parents in their old age and birthed children and raised children. And the fact that we would say to them, you can't trust your own judgment, you have to trust someone else, is wild. That's insane. How accomplished
yeah.
the individual people of this community are, and that we would try to strip them of agency and trust in themselves. That's how did that ever happen?
It's
You know,
crazy,
crazy.
crazy.
And I think
Wow.
it's because so many of the leaders of the community are not householders
Yeah.
because they came into the practice and they came into their authority and they never stepped away from it to be a householder or they never had time before developing their authority as a householder, and their practice and their relationship practice always kind of took precedence over their experience as a householder. And then that's the message, that the practice takes precedence over being a householder. And like, I'm here to say that that does not have to be the case.
Awesome. Awesome. I think that's a good place to wrap. I know I got to go and we went way over. Where can people find you online, or when can we expect more information about your offering?
Well, right now, just my Instagram. I realize that I will probably need to think about a website and stuff. I used to have one, but not anymore. Um, so hopefully my goal is to kind of get things rolling, and then in the fall next year when both my kids are in school full time, I'm hoping this can be a little more steady. So um I my short-term goal is to have the first generation of this program available after the new year, to have kind of a, a fresh slate for people who are interested in doing this work for me. So yeah, I should be comfortable with like kind of public promotion of it um, as we're moving into the holidays. So
Awesome.
hopefully very soon.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Yeah, it was really nice. Thanks for letting me talk at you some more.
Absolutely. I would love to keep going. I am going to get off now, but hopefully we'll
Yeah.
continue the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice to be in
Thanks
touch
a
too.
lot.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Trip Talks. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend, leave a review in your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to What a Trip on Substack. You can find it at tripjohnson.substack.com. That's TRIPPJOHNSON.substack.com. Thanks a lot.